Timothy Finds Faith by Keith Young. Chapter 1, The Surgeon Without Faith. Dr. Timothy Hayes stood beneath the harsh glow of the surgical lights, gloved hands suspended midair, the faint scent of antiseptic clinging to his scrubs. Around him, the operating room buzzed with hushed efficiency, nurses trading instruments, monitors beeping in quiet rhythm, an anesthesiologist murmuring vitals. To anyone watching, Hayes looked like a man in complete control. His movements were fluid, precise, every incision placed with mathematical certainty. The nurses trusted him implicitly. His colleagues envied his skill. His patients, those who survived, often called him a miracle worker. Timothy hated that word. Miracle, he muttered under his breath once, years ago, after a family thanked him profusely in the recovery room. There was no miracle here, he thought. Only skill. Only science. Only the scalpel. Faith, to Timothy, was an illusion, a comforting story for people afraid to face the randomness of life and death. He had seen too much chaos on the operating table to believe in divine order. People lived or died based on tissue viability, blood pressure, and luck, not prayer. He finished the final stitch and stepped back, stripping off his gloves. Another life saved. Another notch on his already legendary record. He didn't smile. He rarely did. Outside the OR, the hospital corridor hummed with midnight quiet. Fluorescent lights flickered, vending machines buzzed softly, and a faint smell of burned coffee hung in the air. Timothy walked briskly toward his office, his mind already moving to the next case. On his desk sat a photo, a boy with wide eyes and messy hair, laughing at something beyond the frame. The photo was old, edges frayed. He hadn't looked at it in months, but tonight, for some reason, his gaze lingered. The boy's name was Jack. His younger brother. Jack I had died when Timothy was 15, a car accident on an icy road. A drunk driver. Timothy had prayed all night in the hospital waiting room, begging God to spare his brother. Jack died anyway. That was the night Timothy decided God wasn't real. Years later, Timothy's success was unquestionable. Chief of surgery at 37. A penthouse overlooking the city skyline. A reputation as the best trauma surgeon in the state. He had money, respect, and control. And yet, the apartment was silent when he came home. No laughter, no warmth, only the muted hum of the refrigerator in the distant city below. He poured himself a glass of scotch and stared out the window. People called him arrogant. Maybe he was. Arrogance had kept him alive in the chaos of emergency rooms, had sharpened his hands when hesitation could kill. But beneath the pride, something quieter gnawed at him, a loneliness he refused to name. He closed his eyes for a moment, leaning against the window. A faint ache throbbed in his chest, sharp and fleeting. Stress, he told himself. Too much caffeine. Too many 12-hour shifts. He ignored it, as always. Tomorrow, another surgery awaited. Another patient clinging to life. Another chance to play God, without believing in one. That night, as Timothy drifted into restless sleep, the image of Jack's laughing face hovered behind his eyelids. And for the first time in years, he wondered, not aloud, not even consciously, if he might be wrong. Chapter 2, The Accident. The operating room was a world unto itself, sterile, silent except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the low hum of machinery. To Timothy Hayes, it was the only place where life made sense. Scalpel, he said, voice calm but firm. Scalpel, echoed Nurse Angela Torres, his most trusted scrub nurse. She placed the instrument into his waiting hand, and the dance began. The patient, a middle-aged man in a car accident, lay draped and unconscious beneath the lights. Shattered ribs, ruptured spleen, internal bleeding, chaos contained within an open chest cavity. For Timothy, chaos was an old friend. He thrived in it. BP dropping, called out Dr. Monroe, the anesthesiologist, glancing at the monitor. Clamp here, Timothy ordered, fingers steady as he worked. Pressure on the aorta. We've got this. Angela watched him closely. She'd worked beside Timothy for 6 years, long enough to know his brilliance, and long enough to know he kept people at arm's length. No one got close to Dr. Hayes. Not really. But something about him tonight felt different. Tighter. Like a man wound too tight for too long. Minutes stretched into hours. The ore was thick with tension, but Timothy moved with practiced precision. He barely heard the monitors or the murmured vitals. The world narrowed to his hands, the scalpel, the bleeding vessels before him. And then, a sharp pain exploded in his chest. He gasped, hand faltering for the first time in his career. The scalpel clattered against the tray. "Doctor?" Angela's voice was sharp with alarm. Timothy staggered back from the table, clutching his chest. The pain was crushing, radiating down his left arm, white-hot and merciless. The room tilted, edges blurring. "Timmy!" Monroe shouted. "Get him down." The nurses moved fast. Hands caught him as his knees buckled. He heard distant shouts, "Code Blue! Code Blue in or 3!" As the world dissolved into chaos. Timothy's vision tunneled. The lights above him flared blindingly bright, then fractured into shards of white. A roaring filled his ears, like ocean waves crashing from 1,000 miles away. He thought of Jack. He thought of all the patients whose names he never remembered. He thought of how alone he was. And then, nothing. The flat line screamed from the monitor as his body hit the floor. Angela dropped to her knees beside him. "Start compressions," she yelled, voice breaking. Monroe shoved her aside, hands pumping Timothy's chest in desperate rhythm. Another nurse pushed an ambu bag onto his face, forcing air into silent lungs. "Charging to 200, someone shouted. The defibrillator pads were slapped onto his chest. "Clear!" His body jolted violently. Still flat. Again. 300. "Clear!" They worked for minutes that felt like eternity. Sweat dripped. Voices trembled. The patient on the table was forgotten, the team was fighting for one of their own. "Come on, Timmy," Angela whispered, tears streaking behind her mask. "Don't you dare do this to us." But Timothy was already gone. He wasn't in the operating room anymore. He wasn't anywhere familiar at all. They laid him flat, ripping open his surgical gown. Angela knelt beside him, her gloved hands shaking as she pressed 2 fingers to his neck. "No pulse. Start compressions." Monroe barked, sliding into position. He interlocked his hands and began pumping Timothy's chest, each thrust desperate, controlled chaos replacing the calm of moments ago. "Ambu bag," someone shouted. A nurse pressed oxygen over his face, forcing air into silent lungs. "Charge to 200, another voice yelled, slapping defibrillator pads onto his chest. "Clear!" Timothy's body jolted violently. Still flat. "Charge to 300. "Clear!" Another jolt. Angela's mask was damp with tears. She leaned close, whispering into his ear between compressions. "Don't you dare leave us, Tim," she murmured, voice breaking. "You hear me? Not like this. Not you." But Timothy wasn't there anymore. The sterile white walls, the frantic shouts, the metallic scent of blood and antiseptic, all of it fell away. Darkness surged, followed by light. A light so pure it swallowed the world. Chapter 3, The Light Beyond Science. There was no pain. No weight. No sound, and yet, not silence either. Timothy Hayes opened his eyes, or thought he did, and found himself suspended in something vast and luminous. The sterile lights of the operating room were gone, replaced by a brilliance so pure it seemed alive. It wasn't harsh or blinding, it was soft and warm, like sunlight filtered through endless crystal. At first, he thought he was dreaming. Hallucinating. Maybe this was what a dying brain conjured in its final seconds. But the more he tried to rationalize it, the more impossible that explanation became. This wasn't imagination. This was more real than anything he'd ever known. The light wasn't empty. It hummed, alive with 1,000 unseen voices singing in perfect harmony. The sound resonated through him, not through ears, but soul. Every note vibrated in places Timothy hadn't known existed. Places long scarred, long hidden. He looked down instinctively. No body. No hands. No surgical gown, no flesh. Only awareness, pure, unbound consciousness. Panic flared. Am I dead? The thought wasn't spoken, yet somehow it echoed into the infinite expanse around him. And in answer, a presence stirred. It came not from above, nor from below, but from everywhere, surrounding him, filling him, pulsing with warmth so profound it brought him to his knees, though he had no knees to kneel upon. You are known. The voice wasn't sound. It was understanding. Pure truth, poured directly into the deepest part of him. You are seen. You are loved. Timothy wanted to argue. Wanted to demand answers, explanations, wanted to cling to science, to logic, to everything that had shielded him for years. But the walls inside him collapsed. The arrogance that had fueled him for so long melted away in the face of this presence. And then, faces. Shapes emerged in the light, coalescing into figures. Familiar. Beloved. Jack. His younger brother stood before him, whole and radiant, wearing the same crooked grin Timothy remembered from childhood. Jackal's hair ruffled in an unseen wind, his eyes bright with unspoken joy. No tubes, no blood, no broken body, just life. Timothy stumbled forward, sobbing without tears. I prayed for you, he thought. I begged him to save you. He didn't answer. Jack stepped closer. No blame. No anger. Only love. He reached out, and though Timothy had no physical form, he felt it. Warmth. Wholeness. Forgiveness. Behind Jack, more faces appeared, patients Timothy had fought to save, some who had lived, some who had died. Families he'd comforted, and others he'd turned away from in cold professionalism. They surrounded him, not condemning, but shining with quiet grace. And then the presence grew stronger. Timothy turned, and understood. Jesus. Not the stained glass figure he'd mocked as a child. Not the painting from his grandmother's Bible. But the living Christ. Light radiated from him, through him, as if he was the light itself. His face held no judgment, only an indescribable compassion that both unmade and remade Timothy in the same breath. Timothy fell inwardly, his soul collapsing in awe. His thought trembled. I don't deserve this. The answer came, gentle yet absolute. No one does. And yet my love is yours. The world shifted. Scenes from Timothy's life unfolded around them like an infinite tapestry. He saw himself as a boy, chasing Jack through autumn leaves. He saw the night of the accident, the mangled car, the sterile hospital, the prayers whispered into silence. He saw the moment faith died in him, replaced by cold resolve, I'll never trust again. The scenes turned. Surgeries. Patients. Lives saved, lives lost. His pride, his brilliance, his walls of detachment. The quiet nights staring at city lights in an empty apartment, drowning loneliness in scotch and work. Why? Timothy whispered into the presence. Why show me this? Why now? Because you asked, long ago, when you thought no one heard. The memory hit him, 15 years old, hands clasped in a hospital chapel, begging God to save Jack. But you didn't answer, Timothy said, pain cracking the thought. I was with him. And I was with you. The panorama shifted again, but this time, it wasn't the past. It was something else. Something, future. Timothy saw himself in a hospital room, holding the hand of a little girl. She was broken, barely clinging to life, but her eyes were bright with something pure. He didn't know her name. Didn't know when or how he would meet her. But he knew she mattered. You will know her when you see her, the presence said. Through her, you will understand. A river appeared, wide, shimmering like liquid glass, flowing from the throne of light itself. On the far bank stood gates of radiance, open and inviting. Peace beyond comprehension lay on the other side. Timothy longed to cross. His soul ached for it. But the presence stopped him. Not yet. Please, Timothy begged. I don't want to go back. Not after this. You have work yet to do. What work? To heal. To love. To live differently. The light surged, filling him with warmth so profound it felt like being remade cell by cell, soul by soul. Will you trust me? Timothy hesitated. Trust, the thing he'd abandoned so long ago. The thing that had felt impossible. Yes, he whispered. Yes. I'll trust you. The river faded. The gates dissolved. The light pulled away, like the tide receding from the shore. No, wait. Timothy reached, desperate. Darkness rushed in. Weight slammed back into him. Pain, cold, sound. Clear. A shock ripped through his chest. His body jolted violently. Still flat. Again, 300. Clear. Timothy gasped, air searing into lungs starved for breath. The monitors screamed back to life. Voices shouted, relieved and frantic. He's back. Angela's sob cracked through the noise. We've got him back. Timothy Hayes opened his eyes to sterile lights and frantic faces. But everything was different now. He had seen the true light. Chapter 4, The Return. Sound came first. A muffled beeping, distant voices, the faint whoosh of a ventilator. Then came weight, crushing, heavy, dragging him down into a body that felt foreign. Pain pulsed in his chest like a dull drumbeat. Timothy groaned, eyelids fluttering open. The ceiling above him was familiar, hospital white, fluorescent lights buzzing softly. But everything felt altered. Tim? The voice was quiet, tentative. Angela Torres leaned over him, her eyes red-rimmed but alert. Relief broke across her face when she saw his eyes focus. Welcome back, she whispered. You scared the hell out of us. Timothy swallowed, throat raw. The patient? Stable, Angela said quickly. We finished the surgery. Monroe took over. Monroe. The anesthesiologist. Timothy's oldest colleague, brilliant, skeptical, and blunt. Where is he? Timothy rasped. Outside, Angela said. He's been pacing for an hour. He'll want to know you're. The door swung open before she finished. Dr. Monroe stepped in, arms crossed, expression unreadable. His graying hair was disheveled, his face lined with exhaustion and irritation. Well, Monroe said, voice dry. Back among the living, I see. Timothy managed a faint nod. Barely. Barely's better than not at all, Monroe replied, pulling up a chair. You coded for 4 minutes. Flatline. No heartbeat. We shocked you twice. Timothy stared at him. 4 minutes. Angela busied herself with monitors, giving them space. Monroe leaned in. Do you remember anything? He asked. Before we brought you back? Timothy hesitated. Images flooded him, the river, the gates of light, Jack's smile, the presence of Christ. A warmth that still lingered, even here. Yes, he whispered. Monroe raised an eyebrow. Hallucinations? Timothy shook his head weakly. No, his voice was hoarse but firm. Not hallucinations. It was real. Monroe sighed. Tim, you were hypoxic. Oxygen deprivation can do strange things to the brain. Vivid dreams. Euphoria. Even religious visions. It wasn't a dream, Timothy said, stronger this time. He gripped Monroe's sleeve, desperate. I saw him. Monroe blinked. Him? Christ, Timothy breathed. I saw Christ. Silence hung heavy. Angela froze, glancing between them. Monroe's jaw tightened, skepticism etched in every line of his face. Tim, Monroe said carefully, I've known you 15 years. You don't believe in that stuff. I didn't, Timothy said. I do now. Angela stepped closer, quiet but firm. Whatever happened, he's different. Look at him. Monroe scoffed. He's confused. Oxygen-starved. He needs rest, not theology. I know what I saw, Timothy insisted. It wasn't the brain. It wasn't chemicals. It was real. More real than this. Monroe stared at him for a long moment, then stood. Get some sleep, he muttered, heading for the door. We'll talk when you're thinking straight. The door clicked shut. Angela lingered. She studied Timothy's face, not just pale and tired, but softer somehow. Unarmored. Tim, she said quietly, you really believe this happened? Timothy turned his head toward her, eyes shining in a way she'd never seen before. I don't just believe, he whispered. I know. Angela didn't answer, but something in her expression shifted. Not belief, not yet, but openness. Timothy sank back into the pillows, exhaustion washing over him. His chest still ached, his body weak. But inside was a strange peace. And beneath that peace, a whisper, you have work yet to do. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5, A Surgeon Reborn. 2 days later, the hospital buzzed with quiet whispers. Dr. Timothy Hayes, the unshakable, unflappable surgeon, had died on the operating room floor and come back. Word spread fast, 4 minutes flatlined. A miracle, some said. A fluke, others muttered. Timothy didn't correct them. How could he? How could he explain what had happened in that light? He sat by the window of his recovery room, fur line trailing from his arm, staring at the skyline. The city sprawled before him, unchanged, traffic lights blinking, taxis honking, yet Timothy felt as though he'd stepped into a different world. The man who had left the UR 2 days ago, arrogant, closed off, faithless, was gone. In his place stood someone he barely recognized. The door creaked open. Angela stepped in, a clipboard tucked under her arm. You're being discharged tomorrow, she said. Vitals are good. Cardiology cleared you for light work in 2 weeks. Timothy nodded absently. Angela hesitated. You haven't said much since you woke up. What is there to say? Timothy murmured. I died, Angela. And I saw something. Angela leaned against the wall. Monroe thinks you're still hypoxic. Monroe will always think that, Timothy said with a faint smile. But you believe me, don't you? Angela hesitated. I don't know what I believe, she admitted. But I know you're different. Before Timothy could reply, a voice crackled over the hospital intercom. Code trauma, pediatric. ETA 3 minutes. Motor vehicle collision. Angela's head snapped toward the hall. That's the ER. Timothy's chest tightened. He shouldn't even be on duty. He wasn't cleared. But something in him, a pull, a whisper, told him he needed to be there. The girl. The ER was chaos. Paramedics burst through the doors with a gurney, EMTs shouting vitals. 8-year-old female, unrestrained passenger, one paramedic barked. Multiple fractures, possible internal bleeding, GCS-5 on arrival. Timothy froze. The girl's face, pale, bloodied, limp, hit him like a tidal wave. He knew her. Not from this world. From the light. The girl whose hand he had seen himself holding. Dr. Hayes. A nurse grabbed his arm. We need a surgeon, now. I'm not cleared, Timothy protested. Cardiac event. There's no one else, she cried. Monroe's in the OR. If we wait, she'll die. Something shifted inside Timothy, a quiet certainty that felt nothing like arrogance and everything like faith. Get me scrubs, he said. Now. The operating room. Minutes later, Timothy stood scrubbed in, heart pounding. Angela was beside him, eyes sharp and steady. You sure about this? She whispered. No, Timothy admitted. But I know I'm supposed to be here. Angela studied him for a beat, then nodded. Then let's save her. The surgery was brutal: shattered pelvis, ruptured spleen, collapsed lung. Timothy's hands moved instinctively, but something was different now. The room no longer felt like a sterile battlefield. It felt holy. Every clamp, every suture, every breath, he prayed. Not aloud, but deep within. Not bargaining, but trusting. BP dropping, Angela called. Clamp here, Timothy ordered. His voice was calm, steadier than it had ever been. We've got her. The team worked in tense silence. The monitors beeped erratically, then steadied. The bleeding slowed. Bit by bit, life returned to the girl's tiny frame. Hours later, they wheeled her to recovery, alive. Barely, but alive. Timothy stood in the empty OR, shaking. He wasn't exhausted, not like usual. He felt filled. Angela touched his arm. You okay? Timothy nodded slowly. I saw her, he whispered. Before this. In the light. Angela stared. You knew? She's why I came back, Timothy said. I didn't understand it then. I do now. He glanced toward the recovery room where the girl lay sleeping. And for the first time in his life, Timothy Hayes bowed his head, not to pride or science, but to prayer. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6, The Girl with the Broken Wings. The first thing Timothy noticed when he entered the pediatric ICU was the sound. Not the beeping monitors or hushed voices of nurses, those were familiar. It was the breathing. Shallow, uneven, but steady. A tiny chest rising and falling beneath a tangle of wires and 4 lines. The girl lay motionless, her face pale against the stark white pillow. Bandages swaddled her torso, an oxygen cannula looped gently around her ears. A teddy bear sat tucked beside her, bloodstained but loved. Name's Faith Carson, Angela whispered beside him, reading from the chart. 8 years old. Parents en route, out of state when the accident happened. Faith. Timothy swallowed hard. The name wasn't lost on him. He stepped closer, drawn by something deeper than duty. He'd seen countless patients in this very position, but never like this. Never one he'd already met, beyond life, beyond time. Hi, Faith, Timothy murmured, his voice soft and uncertain. It's Dr. Hayes. You're safe now. We fixed you up. Her eyelids fluttered faintly, though she didn't wake. Still, he felt something, a faint warmth, almost like recognition. Angela glanced at him. She can't hear you. Timothy shook his head. She can. The parents. The door burst open an hour later. A woman stumbled in first, mid-30s, hair disheveled, eyes red from crying. A man followed close behind, face drawn and pale, knuckles white as he clutched his phone. Where's my baby? The woman sobbed. Mrs. Carson? Timothy stepped forward gently. I'm Dr. Hayes. I operated on your daughter. The woman grabbed his arms. Is she? She's alive, Timothy said softly. She's stable for now. The next 48 hours will be critical, but she made it through surgery. The mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing in relief. The father exhaled shakily, gripping the bed rail. Thank you, the mother whispered. Thank you, God. She froze, noticing the cross-shaped imprint on Timothy's hospital badge, something he hadn't worn before. You pray? She asked, surprised. Timothy hesitated. I didn't, he admitted. But I do now. Hospital pushback. Later that evening, Timothy stood outside Faith's room, chart in hand, when Monroe approached. Still hovering? Monroe said, voice flat. She's critical, Timothy replied evenly. I want to be close. Monroe crossed his arms. You're not even cleared to operate. Admin's furious you scrubbed in. You know that, right? She would have died, Timothy said simply. That's not the point, Monroe snapped. You're making reckless choices. And now? You're talking about visions? Prayer? You're scaring people. Timothy met his gaze, calm. I'm not reckless anymore. I just see things differently. Monroe scoffed. What happened to you, Tim? Timothy looked toward Faith's room, her small figure bathed in soft monitor glow. I died, he said quietly. And I came back. Alone with Faith. That night, when the ward fell quiet, Timothy sat beside Faith's bed. Machines beeped softly in the dark. He reached for her tiny hand, careful not to disturb the 4-line. I don't know why he sent me back, Timothy whispered. But I think it's because of you. Faith didn't stir. But Timothy felt it, the same warmth from the light, faint but real. For the first time in decades, he bowed his head and prayed aloud. Lord, help me save her. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7, The Weight of Miracles. Timothy Hayes hadn't left the pediatric ICU in 24 hours. He slept in a chair beside Faith Carson's bed, her small hand resting in his palm. The steady beep of monitors had become his heartbeat. Nurses whispered as they passed, the once arrogant surgeon, now humbled and quiet, praying over a child. He didn't care what they thought. Morning rounds. The first rays of dawn filtered through the narrow hospital window when the door opened. Angela entered with a coffee in hand, eyebrows raised. You're still here, she said. Timothy nodded, voice hoarse from a sleepless night. She spiked a fever around 3. I didn't want to leave. Angela studied him. Tim, this isn't you. No, Timothy admitted softly. Not anymore. Faith stirred faintly, eyes fluttering open for a moment before slipping closed again. Angela gasped. Did you see that? Timothy smiled, not with arrogance, but quiet gratitude. Yeah, he whispered. She's fighting. The confrontation. Later that morning, Timothy was summoned to the administrative conference room, a sterile space he usually commanded with authority. Today, the air was thick with judgment. Dr. Monroe sat at one end of the table, arms crossed. Beside him, Dr. Evelyn Kessler, chief of staff, folded her hands neatly over a stack of papers. 2 board members flanked her, faces grim. Dr. Hayes, Kessler began coolly, we need to address your actions during the Carson surgery. I saved her life, Timothy said evenly. You weren't cleared to operate, Kessler snapped. You ignored medical restrictions and chain of command. She would have died if I hadn't stepped in, Timothy countered. I stand by that choice. Monroe leaned forward. This isn't just about protocol. Staff are talking. About you praying during surgery. About visions. Timothy didn't flinch. I died on that table 2 nights ago. I saw something. Someone. I'm not ashamed of it. Kessler's expression hardened. You're a surgeon, Hayes. Not a preacher. If your personal revelations interfere with patient care. They won't, Timothy interrupted, firm but calm. My faith doesn't replace my skill. It makes me better. Silence hung heavy. Kessler exchanged a look with Monroe. Effective immediately, she said coldly, you're suspended from surgical duty pending review. Timothy's stomach dropped, but he kept his voice steady. And Faith? She'll remain under hospital care, Kessler replied. You may visit, but not as her doctor. With Faith. Hours later, Timothy sat beside Faith's bed again, stripped of his badge and surgical authority. Her parents were there now, the mother holding Faith's hand, the father pacing. She moved her fingers earlier, the mother whispered, hope flickering in her tired eyes. You think that's a good sign? Timothy smiled softly. It's a very good sign. The father stopped pacing, eyeing Timothy cautiously. You're the one who prayed, right? Yes, Timothy admitted. The man hesitated, then nodded. Keep doing it. Faith stirred again, eyes fluttering halfway open. For a brief second, Timothy swore she looked right at him. A faint squeeze on his hand, so slight he thought he imagined it. "Hey there," he whispered, voice thick. "You're not done yet, are you?" Her eyelids closed, but her lips moved. Barely audible, one word escaped. "Light." Angela, standing in the doorway, covered her mouth in shock. Timothy closed his eyes, tears pricking. He knew exactly what she meant. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8, The Storm Outside. By the third day, Faith's room had become a shrine of quiet hope. Get-well cards lined the windowsill. A stuffed unicorn sat propped against her pillow. Nurses came and went softly, as if loud noises might shatter the fragile miracle in progress. Timothy Hayes never left her side. A flicker of hope. Pupils reacting, Angela murmured during morning rounds, shining a penlight across Faith's eyes. "That's new." Timothy exhaled slowly, relief loosening the knot in his chest. "She's waking up." Slowly, Angela cautioned. "Still critical." Timothy nodded. He wasn't looking for instant miracles anymore. The light had taught him something: healing takes time. Faith's parents entered quietly, holding hands, a silent truce born of shared fear. They hovered by the bed, watching their daughter stir. "Dr. Hayes," Faith's mother whispered, "thank you, again." Timothy shook his head gently. "Thank him, not me." The father glanced at him. "You really believe that now, don't you?" Timothy smiled faintly. "More than anything." Whispers and headlines. Outside Faith's room, the hospital was buzzing, not with the usual rhythm of medical life, but with rumors. The atheist surgeon who saw heaven. For minutes dead, brought back by prayer. Miracle or madness? By noon, a local news crew was camped in the lobby. Patients' families whispered as Timothy passed, phones raised discreetly. Some looked at him with awe. Others with suspicion. The antagonist. Dr. Marcus Vance stood at the far end of the corridor, arms folded, lips pressed thin. A board member and rival trauma surgeon, Vance had coveted Timothy's position for years. Now, with Timothy suspended, opportunity gleamed in his sharp eyes. "Enjoying the spotlight?" Vance drawled as Timothy approached. Timothy stiffened. "Not interested." "Really?" "Because the cameras seem very interested in you." Vance smirked. "Near-death visions, praying in the or, you're either a prophet or a liability." "I'm neither," Timothy said calmly. "I'm just different now." "Different doesn't play well in hospitals," Vance replied. "Families want competence, not mysticism. Administration's already on edge." Timothy met his gaze. "I saved Faith's life." Vance leaned in, voice low. "And if she doesn't make it?" This little miracle story becomes malpractice. The setback. That night, alarms blared in Faith's room. BP dropping, a nurse shouted. 70/40. Timothy rushed in, heart pounding. What happened? Internal bleeding, possible ruptured stitch. Angela grabbed a chart. She needs surgery, now. Timothy froze, suspended, powerless. Monroe and Vance stormed in moments later, already suiting up. "I'll take it," Vance said briskly. Timothy stepped forward. "No, I know her anatomy, I did the first." "Out of the or, Hayes," Vance barked. "You're done here." The prayer. Through the glass, Timothy watched them will Faith toward the operating theater. Helpless. Useless. He sank into a chair, head in his hands. For years, he'd trusted only himself, his skill, his hands, his control. Now all he could do was trust the one who had sent him back. "Please," Timothy whispered. "If you brought me back for her, don't let this be the end." The outcome. Hours crawled by. Finally, Monroe emerged, peeling off gloves. His expression softened when he saw Timothy. "She's stable," Monroe said quietly. Vance fixed the bleed. "She's not out of the woods, but she's alive." Timothy exhaled a shaky breath, tears burning his eyes. Thank you. Monroe hesitated, then muttered, Don't thank me. Just keep praying, I guess. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9, Small Miracles. The hum of machines had become the soundtrack of Timothy Hayes' days. He sat in the same chair, hour after hour, watching Faith Carson's chest rise and fall, praying more often than breathing. He'd stopped caring about the whispers in the hallway, the cameras in the lobby, the board meetings he wasn't invited to. None of it mattered. Only Faith mattered. Quiet moments. Morning, Faith, Timothy murmured softly. You're stronger than yesterday. I can feel it. She didn't respond, not yet. But her fingers twitched against his hand, a tiny spark of life that sent warmth rushing through him. Angela peeked in, carrying coffee. Still here? Wouldn't be anywhere else, Timothy replied. She smiled faintly. You're starting to scare people. The great Dr. Hayes, sitting bedside, holding hands, talking about miracles. Timothy chuckled, low and tired. Maybe they should be scared. I barely recognize myself either. The first word. That afternoon, Faith's parents arrived. Her mother sat opposite Timothy, tears brimming as she stroked Faith's hair. She used to sing all the time, her mother whispered. Even when she was little. Hummed herself to sleep. Timothy smiled softly. Maybe she still does. We just can't hear it yet. As if in answer, Faith stirred. Her lips parted, a tiny breath, a faint murmur. Everyone froze. Light. The same words she had whispered days ago. Faith? Timothy leaned close, voice trembling. What did you say? Her eyelids fluttered. Light. Angela gasped, hand over her mouth. Faith's parents clutched each other, tears spilling freely. Timothy's throat tightened. Yes, sweetheart, he whispered. I saw it too. A step forward. The next morning, Faith opened her eyes fully for the first time. Doctors would later call it unexpected but not impossible. Timothy knew better. He sat by her bed as she blinked groggily, taking in the world with wary confusion. Hi, he whispered. She stared at him for a long moment, then, barely audible, you were there. Timothy froze. Where? In the light, Faith murmured, voice fragile but certain. Angela's breath hitched. Faith's parents stared, speechless. Timothy bowed his head, tears spilling silently. Yes, he whispered. I was. Quiet gratitude. That night, Timothy stayed after visiting hours, the hospital quiet and still. Faith slept peacefully, the faintest smile on her face. Timothy whispered a prayer, not desperate, not bargaining. Just gratitude. Thank you, he murmured into the quiet. For her. For this. For the first time since his brother's death, Timothy felt whole. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10, Quiet Light. The hospital felt different now. Quieter. Softer. Or maybe Timothy Hayes was the one who had changed. He still walked the same halls, still passed the same sterile walls and buzzing fluorescents. But where he used to see only cases and charts, now he saw people, tired nurses, anxious parents, children clutching stuffed animals like lifelines. He saw them. And for the first time in his career, he cared beyond the scalpel. Faith's awakening. Faith was sitting up when Timothy entered her room, her tiny frame dwarfed by pillows. Her eyes were open, pale blue, curious, too old for her 8 years. Hey, Faith, Timothy said softly. She blinked at him, then whispered, Hi. It was only one word, but it felt like a sunrise. Angela, standing at the foot of the bed, smiled. Speech returning faster than expected, she murmured. Neurology will call it lucky. Timothy smiled faintly. I call it grace. Sharing stories. Later, when Faith's parents stepped out for coffee, Timothy pulled a chair closer. You scared us, you know, he said gently. But you're tough. Tougher than me. Faith tilted her head, curious. You, scared? Timothy chuckled softly. Used to be. I was scared of a lot of things. Of losing people. Of not being enough. I thought if I didn't believe in anything, I couldn't be disappointed. Faith frowned slightly, small brows knitting. Didn't believe? Not in God, Timothy admitted. Not until, the light. Faith's eyes brightened. I saw you there. Timothy swallowed hard. I saw you too. The brother. Do you have family? Faith asked quietly. Timothy hesitated, then nodded. I had a brother. Jack. He died when we were kids. Faith studied him for a moment. He's happy now. Timothy's breath caught. What did you say? He's happy, she repeated softly. He was in the light, too. He waved at you. Tears blurred Timothy's vision. He hadn't told anyone about Jack, not Faith, not her parents, not even Angela. Faith's parents. That evening, Faith's parents returned to find Timothy reading to her from a children's book she'd chosen. The girl leaned against him, eyelids heavy but peaceful. The mother watched quietly, tears in her eyes. She trusts you, she whispered. Timothy looked up, humbled. I don't deserve it. The father put a hand on his shoulder. Maybe none of us do. But, thank you. Quiet prayer. When night fell and Faith drifted to sleep, Timothy sat alone at her bedside, the soft hum of monitors around him. He bowed his head, no longer hesitant to pray. Thank you, he whispered. For her. For Jack. For this second chance. The quiet seemed to answer, not with words, but with peace. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11, Why You Came Back. The night was still, the hospital hushed except for the low murmur of machines and the distant squeak of a janitor's cart down the hall. Timothy sat beside Faith's bed, a children's book open but forgotten in his lap. Faith was awake, small fingers tracing the edge of her blanket. Her color had returned, faint but real. Every day, she seemed less like the broken child who'd arrived and more like the vibrant girl he'd glimpsed in the light. The question. Dr. Hayes? Faith's voice was soft, fragile but steady. Yes, sweetheart. Her eyes met his, pale blue, impossibly earnest. Why did you come back? Timothy froze. The question lingered in the quiet, heavier than anything he'd faced in an operating room. He swallowed. I don't know. Faith frowned slightly. I think you do. Timothy's answer. Timothy leaned forward, elbows on his knees, searching for words. When I was gone, he said slowly, I saw something. Someone. The most beautiful light you can imagine. It felt like home. And I didn't want to leave. Faith nodded, eyes shining. Me too. Timothy smiled softly. But then I saw you. In that light. And I knew. I had to come back. For you. Faith's tiny hand reached for his. For me? Yes, Timothy whispered. But not just for you. For everyone I've hurt. For everyone I've ignored. To make things right. Shared light. Faith's gaze drifted to the window, where city lights flickered like distant stars. It wasn't scary, she whispered. The light. It felt like love. Timothy's throat tightened. That's exactly what it was. Faith turned back to him, studying his face with quiet wisdom beyond her years. You were sad before, she said softly. But not now. Timothy blinked back tears. No, he admitted. Not now. Faith's parents. Later that evening, Faith's parents returned. They paused in the doorway, watching silently as Timothy braided Faith's hair clumsily, her giggling softly at his failed attempt. She's healing, the mother whispered. The father nodded, voice thick. So is he. A quiet promise. When Faith drifted to sleep, Timothy stayed behind, hand resting lightly over hers. I don't know why you chose me, he prayed quietly. But I won't waste this chance. The words weren't desperate anymore. They were steady. Certain. And for the first time in his life, Timothy Hayes felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12, The Stone Breaks. The hospital cafeteria buzzed with whispers. News crews crowded the lobby, their cameras waiting like vultures. Headlines flashed on nearby screens. Surgeon claims he saw heaven. 8-year-old's recovery baffles doctors. Timothy Hayes ignored them all. His world was one room, Faith's room. The board meeting. Dr. Hayes, Chief Kessler said coolly, we can't ignore your conduct. Unauthorized surgery. Public statements about visions. You've turned this hospital into a circus. Timothy stood before the board, hands steady. I saved her life. By breaking protocol, Kessler snapped. You've become a liability. Vance leaned back, smirking. We can't have surgeons preaching miracles in the OR. Timothy met his gaze calmly. I'm not preaching. I'm telling the truth. The crisis. Before the board could respond, an urgent page blared overhead. Code Blue, Pediatric ICU. Timothy's heart dropped. Faith. He ran. Nurses crowded Faith's room, alarms screaming. Her tiny body convulsed, monitors flashing red. Cardiac arrhythmia, a resident shouted. BP crashing. Timothy froze in the doorway. He was suspended, barred from touching her. For the first time in his career, he couldn't fix it. Angela grabbed his arm. Tim, what do we do? Timothy's voice trembled. We pray. Surrender. He dropped to his knees beside Faith's bed, hands clasping hers. God, he whispered, I've trusted my hands my whole life. But this is yours. The chaos blurred around him. Nurses working, doctors shouting, but Timothy only saw Faith. Only felt the warmth of her small hand in his. Please, he whispered. Bring her back. Silence. Then, a faint, steady beep. The monitor leveled. The convulsions stopped. Faith's breathing steadied. Doctors stared in stunned silence. She's stable, someone murmured. Timothy exhaled, tears streaming. He didn't cheer. Didn't shout. Just bowed his head in quiet gratitude. Chapter 13, The Light Returns. 2 weeks later, Faith Carson walked, unsteady but smiling, out of the pediatric wing, her hand wrapped in Timothy's. The media called it a miracle. The hospital called it improbable. Timothy called it grace. The farewell. In the lobby, Faith's parents hugged him tightly. We can never repay you, her mother whispered. Timothy smiled. You already have. Faith looked up at him, eyes bright. We both came back, she said softly. Timothy's throat tightened. Yeah, he whispered. We did. A new purpose. Weeks later, Timothy returned to the hospital, not as the man he was, but as the man he'd become. He still performed surgeries, still held steady hands, but now, he held something greater. Hope. He sat with patients' families in waiting rooms. He prayed quietly when asked. He listened. He cared. Not because he saw the light once, but because he carried it now. The final scene. One evening, Timothy stood outside the hospital, watching the sun sink over the city skyline. Golden light bathed the streets, warm and endless. He thought of Jack. Of Faith. Of the presence that had called him back. Thank you, he whispered to the wind. And for the first time, Timothy Hayes smiled, truly smiled, as the light filled him from within. The end.